I know how to load a pistol now. Do you know how to load a pistol, Keller? First you have to buy powder, gunpowder, not damp and not the coarse kind used for cannons, and then you start by putting in some powder, you get felt from a door somewhere, and only then drop in the bullet, not the bullet before the powder, because it won't fire. Do you hear, Keller, because it won't fire. Ha, ha. Isn't that a splendid reason, friend Keller? Ah, Keller, you know, I'm going to embrace you and kiss you now. Ha, ha, ha. How was it that you so suddenly turned up in front of him today? Call on me sometime soon and we'll have champagne. We'll all get drunk. Do you know that I have 12 bottles of champagne in Lebedev's cellar? Lebedev offered it to me as a bargain 2 days ago, the day after I moved to his place, so I bought it all. I'll get the whole company together. And you, are you going to sleep this night? Like every other, Prince. Well, sweet dreams then. Ha, ha. The prince crossed the road and disappeared into the park, leaving the somewhat puzzled Keller pondering. He had never seen the prince in such a strange mood, and could not have imagined it till then. A fever, maybe, because he's a nervous man, and all this has affected him, but he certainly won't turn coward. His kind doesn't turn coward, by God. Keller thought to himself. Champagne. Interesting news, by the way. 12 bottles, sir, a tidy dozen, that's a decent stock. I'll bet Lebedev took it in pledge from somebody. He's a sweet enough fellow, though, this prince, I really like that sort, there's no time to waste, though, and if there's champagne, then this is the moment. That the prince was as if in a fever was certainly correct. For a long time he wandered through the dark park and finally found himself pacing along a certain alley. His consciousness retained the memory that he had already walked along that alley, from the bench to a certain old tree, tall and conspicuous, about 100 steps, some 30 or 40 times up and down. He would have been quite unable to remember what he had thought about during that whole hour, at least, in the park, even if he had wanted to. He caught himself, however, in a certain thought, which made him suddenly rock with laughter. Though there was nothing to laugh at, he still wanted to laugh. He imagined that the supposition of a duel might not have been born in Keller's head alone, and that, therefore, the story about loading a pistol might not have been accidental. Ha! He stopped suddenly, as another idea dawned on him. She came down to the terrace tonight when I was sitting in the corner, and was terribly surprised to find me there, and laughed so, talked about tea, but at that time she already had this note in her hand, which means she must have known I was sitting on the terrace, so why was she surprised? Ha, ha, ha. He snatched the note from his pocket and kissed it, but at once stopped and pondered. How strange! How strange! He said after a moment, even with a sort of sadness. He always felt sad at moments of great joy, he did not know why himself. He looked around intently and was surprised that he had come there. He was very tired, went over to the bench and sat down. It was extremely quiet all around. The music in the Vauxhall was over. There was probably no one in the park now. It was certainly at least 11:30. The night was quiet, warm, bright, a Petersburg night at the beginning of the month of June, but in the thick, shady park, in the alley where he was, it was almost completely dark. If anyone had told him at that moment that he had fallen in love, that he was passionately in love, he would have rejected the idea with astonishment and perhaps even with indignation. And if anyone had added that Aglaya's note was a love letter, setting up a lover's tryst, he would have burned with shame for that man and might have challenged him to a duel. All this was perfectly sincere, and he never once doubted it or allowed for the slightest second thought about the possibility of this girl loving him or even the possibility of him loving this girl. The possibility of loving him, a man like him, he would have considered a monstrous thing. He vaguely thought that it was simply a prank on her part, if there indeed was anything to it, but he was somehow all too indifferent to the prank itself and found it all too much in the order of things. He himself was concerned and preoccupied with something completely different. He fully believed the words that had escaped the agitated general earlier, that she was laughing at everyone and especially at him, the prince. He had not felt insulted by it in the least. In his opinion, it had to be so. The main thing for him was that tomorrow he would see her again, early in the morning, would sit beside her on the green bench, listen to how a pistol is loaded, and look at her. He needed nothing more. The question of what it was that she intended to tell him, and what the important matter was that concerned him directly, also flashed once or twice in his head. Besides, he had never doubted even for a minute the actual existence of this important matter for which he had been summoned, but he almost did not think of this important matter now, to the point that he even did not feel the slightest urge to think about it. The crunch of quiet steps on the sand of the alley made him raise his head. A man, whose face it was difficult to make out in the darkness, came up to the bench and sat down beside him. The prince quickly moved close to him, almost touching him, and made out the pale face of Rogojin. "I just knew you'd be wandering about here somewhere. I didn't have to look long," Rogojin muttered through his teeth. It was the first time they had come together since their meeting in the corridor of the inn.